Hello there, welcome to another Riot Act Reviews where I, Stephen Hill, yes that is me, and he, Remfry Deadman. Hello Remfry.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm alright, I'm just going to have a sip of my water before we carry on.
I'm about to talk about one of my favourite bands, so I'm very
Alright,
excited.
don't spoil it. You know us, we're from the Riot Act podcast. We do a weekly show about music, alternative music, if you like. I mean, whatever makes you happy, I guess. Call it what you want. But just music that we like, basically. We have designated an entire show to finding and talking about music that we think is essential or interesting or commercially viable or many a thing. There could be many reasons for us deciding to pick an album that we want to cover on this particular show. And Remfry's already spoiled it. Today we're just doing an album because it's pretty much one of your favourite bands ever, isn't it, really?
I think this is a band who more than deserve an entire episode dedicated to them as well.
Today we're going to be looking at Where Myth Becomes Memory by Rolo Tomassi, the sixth studio album from the eclectic Sheffield post-prog hardcore metal screamo band. I think I'm not sure I've nailed that as a descriptor.
Well, none of them are based in Sheffield anymore, so that's definitely not true.
They not started out in Sheffield, though, right?
They started out in Sheffield, yeah.
Then you can take the guys out of Sheffield, but you can't take the Sheffield out of the guys.
Sure. I mean, Rolo Tomassi at this point are Rolo Tomassi. They're not really anything other than themselves. I think that is something that I absolutely love about them. I talk about identity all the time and having a strong identity, and the moment you hear Rolo Tomassi come in, you just go, well, this is Rolo Tomassi. I think at this point the big influences are I suppose the
off already. Unbelievable. It's just off, just straight away. No, just off, aren't you?
Well, you said it's that accurate. I just said I think the elevator pitch is like Dillinger meets neoclassical type stuff, and actually plonked together in a way that works, even though those two things seem really, really disparate. But yeah. So
this is the follow-up to 2018's pretty fucking amazing Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It album. That album was a very personal, often heartbreaking listen, I think, and it is a genuinely brilliant record. Although my notes here say, Remfry, you are a massive fan of this band, probably more of a long-term, well, certainly more of a long-term fan than me. Tell me why they're so great. But you've already done that, so I'm going to skip on. I'm going to skip on, and I'm just like, do you think they've evolved a lot since their early days, Rolo Tomassi?
Goodness, yeah. I think they've evolved an awful lot. I mean, back in the early days, there certainly wasn't any of that neoclassical element at all, I would say. They were kind of put in with that. Do you remember the Nintendo core scene?
Yes, I do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and, they did share DNA with that scene, certainly on Hysterics, maybe a little bit on Cosmology as well. But no, they've evolved. I would say there's been a relatively strong evolution from every single album. I suppose I don't really want to start with what could be perceived as a negative. It isn't a massive negative, to be honest. But one of the things that struck me when I first heard this record is the evolution between this album and the last one is one of the smallest ones that they've ever had, if I'm totally honest. But I think the reason for that is because with the last two records, with Grievances and Time Will Die, I think they have really found their core sound and what it is that they are trying to do, and it is so uniquely them that of course you're going to get to a stage where that evolution between each record does begin to slow down, diminish. I want to make it clear that there are still new things on here that I've never heard them do before, but in terms of, say, from Estrella to Grievances, where the evolution was huge as an example, I think the evolution is smaller here, but it's still there, I think. Do you agree with that? Does this sound different to Time Will Die?
Not massively, but then I think that's all right, really.
I think that's fine.
I think that's all right, because I think you've kind of already nailed it, really, by saying when you are this unique about, and again, we reviewed Korn, which is a very different band and has had a very different career, but we reviewed the last Korn album. We said, if you're really, really good at doing something. Yeah. And I think this album is certainly more eclectic than the last Korn record. I mean, Korn are essentially good at doing they used to be good at doing one thing, and then they changed to being very, very good at doing another thing. And you shouldn't really expect Korn to be musically kind of evolutionary at all. But I think I'm much like, and again, we just reviewed Black Country New Road, and I think to say much like Black Country New Road, there is so much to mine still, I think, from Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It sonically, that if you continue to mine that even more on this album, which I think broadly speaking, I don't think it's the same album at all. Doesn't strike me as being, exactly the same as a record, certainly in terms of, doesn't feel like as sad a record as Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It. It doesn't feel like it's sort of as heartbroken a record, I don't think.
Well, I in a way, I know thematically it isn't, because did you read the bio for this album, Steve?
Yeah, I did, yes.
Yeah, what did you think of the bio? I thought it was pretty good, actually.
Did you read it? Did you write it? Did you?
I
knew you did. I knew you did. You can tell a Remfry Deadman bio when when an entire line is like one word. Remfry using like Welsh towns as like his ways to describe. No, I did. You've got a very unique writing style, Remfry.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a compliment as far as I'm concerned.
No, it is. And yeah,
yes. So the reason
you want me to like go? No. You wrote a really good bio.
The reason I said that wasn't for nepotism or anything like that. It was because in the bio it mentions, brilliantly written bio. It mentions that it's formed a sort of the third part of a trilogy, a sort of thematic trilogy, and they didn't set out to write a trilogy when they set out to write Grievances, and even Time Will Die. I think Eva kind of hit upon the idea of this trilogy idea as they were putting this album together, but that came through the lyrical themes, and this album is about rebirth after difficult events. So yes, your perception,
or as you put it, a barrage of excitement, of noise, hope, dreams, and feelings of optimistic caution. It's astounding.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. I mean, spoiler alert.
That sounds like a good bio. Anyway, yes. So so your instincts that this is generally a happier album, I think, are bang on correct. Yes.
I don't even want to say happier.
Yeah, happier doesn't sound quite right, but
I
more
think
optimistic.
There are more. There's the odds. Rolo Tomassi are good at doing some really euphoric things.
They really
in their
are.
Music. And on the last record, those euphoric things felt, those euphoric kind of, those skyscraper moments felt kind of,
they felt with like a bit of melancholy.
Yeah, they were kind of grey. They were looking up to the, hitting that skyscraper chorus and then hitting a grey cloud.
Yeah,
not
a criticism, but yeah,
not a criticism. As a stylistic choice that they have made. And I mean, yeah, and I do feel like this is, the euphoria is slightly more. I don't want to give people the impression that this is a fucking, happy album, like, like a super fucking like heel clicking, we're in the money kind of album. It's not that.
No, but it is happier.
But the kind of the euphoric, fist pumping moments do feel actually more fist pumping, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's also really, really fucking heavy. I mean, what?
That's why you don't write bios for Rolo Tomassi, because you go fist pumpier.
Well, I wouldn't write that, would I?
Sorry, carry on. That sounded far harsher than I meant it to sound. Go on.
I just think, okay, let's get into the album.
I'm excited because we were reviewing
it starts really, really lovely. I mean, Eva has got a beautiful singing voice, which is quite rare in metal and hardcore and whatever you want to call it, to have a genuinely great singing voice. I mean, look, there are a lot of people in hardcore and metal and rock music and stuff who can sing, but she actually could probably get away with not doing that screaming lark. But here we are. out of what she does.
I
But
wouldn't.
she could bin it off.
I agree. I wouldn't like that because I like the contrast between the two things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, she has a beautiful singing voice, and it has developed fantastically over, I think, particularly these last 3 records. There were clean vocals from the beginning, I think, but certainly her confidence in her clean vocals has become so much more clear and precise in what she's doing, to the point now where there are actually quite a few what I'm going to call ambient, chilled out, purely clean vocal tracks on this record. I think there are at least 3.
About 3, I was going to say,
yeah, 3 or 4 or something like that. But almost always is the first one of those, and yeah, this is a string to their bow, which they started with Time Will Die in terms of doing like an entire ambient, cleanly sung track, and they've really embraced that even more now with this record, which I think is great because it makes the contrast when stuff does.
Well, I was going to say,
where
it gets so much more exciting when that shit does kick in. I mean,
Chef's
the
kiss,
third
yes.
song, Mutual Ruin, is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Symphonic parts, like crushingly savage riffs, vocals are absolutely scabrous, jazz drumming, minimalistic piano, all kind of building and swirling and dipping and rising and coalescing together in such a beautiful way. And I think that would actually fit rather well in one of their bios, what I've just said. But, that's just my opinion.
That was good. I liked that.
Yeah. So fuck you. Anyway, but yeah, it's an absolutely brilliantly exciting song.
Mutual Ruin's fucking fantastic. Yeah, absolutely brilliant song, and it also goes into Labyrinthine, which I think is as good, probably. Like,
yeah,
I think,
and it's made up of. That reminds me of the Blood Brothers used to have like little organ parts on there, and there's a bits on that I'm like, oh, this reminds me of the Blood Brothers, which is
that's a great shout.
Really
I was listening to the Blood Brothers the other day. What a fucking great band they were. I'm going to give a shout out now. I talked to Chris a little bit about this, but the guitarist Chris Caford has really, you can tell that he's spent a lot of time trying to get different sounds out of his guitar. And we were talking about this quite recently. We were talking about the gent scene quite recently for a different episode, and how, all the guitar sounds sounded the fucking same from band to band, because, they're all just using the same patches that these patches which are just put out that everyone can use. It's basically like factory settings for guitars now. And Chris went into quite a lot of he spent a lot of time creating these really crushing guitar tones for this record and making them different from song to song, and the difference that makes in terms of keeping your interest up throughout the record is absolutely immense. When you get into songs like Drip and Prescience later on the record, I mean, those songs are so fucking heavy, and it's due to a number of factors, but I think the fact that Chris kept fucking with his guitar sounds and fucking with his guitar tones and making them sound different is a huge part of the reason for that. And more bands should be doing that rather than just dialing in, I don't know, Meshuggah's guitar tone, which is what a lot of bands do now. But I think that's great something I love about Rolo.
It's fucking brilliant. And I feel like every time they build something, when they build upon these dynamics, they build upon them really, really sensibly. When we get to, go back quickly to Mutual Ruin, when you get to Mutual Ruin, you're 3 tracks in, and it's already great, and it's, it's quiet and, kind of crystalline and cinematic, and then it gets a bit heavier, and then it gets to that, and you're like, fucking hell, you're just layering and layering and layering upon stuff. And, it's so dynamically satisfying, so much of this record. You mentioned the riff on Labyrinth. I think you mentioned Close. You mentioned Drip, which is like Gojira heavy. That is like fucking Gojira, and I think maybe that's something that people don't necessarily. I mean, I certainly didn't associate Rolo Tomassi with like death metal Gojira shit, but the riff on that is breathtaking.
They can do that if they want to.
Fucking breathtaking.
Yeah. And it has
then
that.
You've got
Drip is the one with that like drone, isn't it? I've already said this in a Metal Hammer review, but it has that kind of Skynet styled drone thing, and it's so ominous and Oh, it's frightening. It's proper frightening.
Yeah. There is a fair bit of kind of 80s. I mean, I know that we mentioned the 80s synth quite a lot, but, you know, Prescience has got a bit of 80s synth. I think there's a synthy shimmering part on Drip. I wanted to say, by the way, James and Eva having a sort of vocal trade-off on the song Closer, I thought was really good as well. It's only kind of just a little tiny nod to that kind of vocal back and forth, but it's really, really good. The fact that they do that like once and they just don't do it for the rest of the album is mad. But like
Closer is another one of the ambient tracks, and it's an absolutely beautiful song. I think they've already released it as a single, but it's a really fantastic song, and breaks up, you know, it comes between Labyrinthine and Drip and breaks that up absolutely beautifully. I think one of the strengths of Rolo Tomassi in 2022 in recent years is they really know how to use dynamics, as you sort of already alluded to, but also how to build up to it sort of gradually. They don't kind of, they have trust in the listener that they will have the patience to get there over a long period of time. They're not scared, you know, they're not scared and going, oh God, if we're not doing something loud and heavy in the next minute, then people are going to stop being interested, like that siren. If we don't go really heavy super quickly, then people are going to get bored. You know, they have the patience to build up to those things, and that's something I think that makes them even more powerful as a result.
There's some cinematic piano chords on Stumbling, which really sounds like some sort of Marvel universe sort of. I don't watch the Marvel films, but anyway, so they sound like some sort of film score type thing. And it's very, very delicate. And I'm just imagining, like, it's got a kind of Ludovico Einaudi sort of thing to it. And I was like, just imagine if that was the only thing they did. They'd be on John Lewis adverts and making multi-platinum selling albums, but they actually try and make varied art. The fucking idiots, you morons. Why are you not trying to just do that? If I was, look, The Temptation, I mean, the thing I listened to that and I was like, this is so good.
You could actually be making money. Yeah.
If you just did this, you could actually be like famous, really, really famous, but you fucking shout all over it and play massive guitar riffs and stuff. You fucking idiots. Why are you pandering to these metal pricks?
I can't wait to send this to them. Yeah, they're going to love it.
Well, look, I mean, you know,
Steve's being facetious.
Like, I am. I mean, to be very, very clear, they're much better for being the band who they are. And I think it says more about our culture that, you know, that they're not as big as like London Grammar. When they could do London Grammar, you know, I could shit an album of that out. On the basis of this album, they could shit out an album 10 times as good as the last London Grammar album in their fucking sleep.
You know what? I like London Grammar, but I agree. I do agree, and I think that's a very good point. Like, sometimes it isn't just, oh, let's put quiet bits in for the sake of dynamics. It's really clear. I mean, I know this for a fact because I've spoken to James on it, you know, on several occasions about our mutual love for the likes of Olafur Arnolds and like Steve Reichs and so on and so forth, those kind of artists, those modern neoclassical artists. And I know that he's really big into that kind of stuff, but it's obvious that they really understand that stuff and really know what they're doing with it, you know, rather than it just being like, we should probably have a quiet bit here to break up the momentum. I kind of feel like, I'm not strictly saying that they should do this because I like the dynamics and the fact that it goes from place to place, but if Rolo Tomassi said we're going to release an ambient EP, or our next record is going to be like just ambient stuff, I would be very excited to hear that because I know they would do it really well. Yeah. I like the mixture and I would like them to continue doing that personally, but at the same time, if they were to do that, I know that they could pull it off.
And it sort of circles right back round to the start at the end as well. It's you know, it kind of nods to, I think the last track, the end of Eternity, kind of nods to Almost Always the first. So it's a spherical album. Remfry, we love a spherical album.
In the words of Chris Morris, spherical album.
And
cyclical.
I think this is a really great record. I think people who loved the last record who maybe got on board. I mean, I feel like I properly got on board with Rolo Tomassi with that last album, and in that respect, like if you were like me and you got on board properly with that last album, this, I think, broadly speaking, is a similar-esque record. I think if you're a long-term fan, they're in the absolute form of their career, aren't they, at the moment? This is as good as they've ever been.
I mean, I think so. I certainly, this last trilogy of records, my absolute favourite, I think, remains Grievances, personally. But in terms of, like, objective critique, it's really difficult to kind of separate these three records in terms of quality. I think they're all fantastic. And taken as a trilogy, I've actually sat down and listened to all three records, like, back to front, multiple times actually, because I'm such a nerd, but I have done that a few times, and it's just an astonishing thing to do when you kind of sit down with all three records and go through the whole thing. And it, even though it wasn't intended to be a trilogy from the beginning, maybe it's me putting things onto it, I don't know, but it does feel trilogy-esque now. And what that means in terms of, like, are they going to go on to do different things now? I don't know. I mean, I don't think they know themselves. I did ask a little bit about that in the interview, which is coming up. But it really is an astonishing piece of work, as per, I mean, I suppose that's not very surprising coming from me, because I have wanged on about how much I adore Rolo Tomassi for the majority of my professional career. But they continue to release fantastic records. There isn't a single Rolo Tomassi album that isn't good, at the very least. And they have been getting better and better as they go on. And this is another great record, which does show signs of progression, but doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in any way, shape, or form. It's excellent. I'm really pleased that you like it as much as you do. Do you think you like it as much as Time Will Die, or more?
Definitely, I do. I think I would put them completely on par.
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably accurate. Honest. Yeah.
I mean, if you're a fan, you're going to love it. I mean, if you aren't, then I would say now is a very, very good time for you to invest in Rolo Tomassi and become a fan of the band. I mean, basically, what I'm saying is you might want to consider listening to this record, everyone.